issues you think of where to go with that, please do. So we are about to start on best ways to advocate for your student. And I will just quickly give names. I'm going to let you each really introduce yourselves. We are going to be starting today with Kari Naegele, correctly get it, who is the lead social worker in our district and the social worker at Hidden Hills Elementary School. And she's going to be able to give us an overview of some of the roles of the people that are at the school sites who you might want to start with if you have a question or an issue of concern, what they each do, and some of the best ways to contact them. And also some tips on being the most productive and effective in those communications. So, you know, having the plan or how to approach the conversation. And then we'll find out there's some issues that either are not appropriate to go there or need to go up to the next level, which is often the principal. And so we have our two assistant superintendents of leadership, Dr. Lindsay for our elementary, Dr. Courson for secondary, your middle school and high schools. And they're going to give you some more information about what the principals can do and when it needs to go up from the principal to the district level, whether it's going to them or other individuals at the district that might be handling some types of issues, what to expect when you get there and how to begin those conversations and how to contact or schedule a meeting. And then there is the next level, which often I think some people think is the place to start, but I'm not convinced that it's the most effective way to get to the answer. And that is going to the governing board. So we have a former governing board member who still works with Arizona School Board Association, right? And so she is this is Julie Bacon, and she's going to talk about what a governing board can and cannot do, and when it would be appropriate to bring something to the governing board and how you would go about doing that. So we're going to sort of go through from the school on up, because often we want to start with where the issue is actually happening. I think, you know, so that we can get it addressed and nip it in the bud. So we're going to follow that same flow here from school site on up. And then, of course, after they each given a quick presentation, but they're going to give their presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions. So we will begin with Kari Naegele. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. I have been a social worker in PV for 22 years, I think. And as I have been in my career that time, I have seen a lot of changes in the amount of support that we've been able to offer students. We've been able to offer more and more as time has passed, which has been really great. So you should have a sheet in front of you, or your neighbor should, that you can look at. I won't read the whole thing to you, but this gives you an overview of the support professionals that you might find at your student school. Every school is a little bit different. Every school does not have all of these people. You will have a nurse at every school. You will have, for some period of time, a psychologist at every school. A lot of our schools have social workers. I think all of the elementaries have at least a half-time tiered support specialist. And then the counselors, as it says, are primarily the middle and the high school level. We do have some elementary level counselors that are grant funded. So they function very similarly to the way the social workers do at the elementary level in terms of the kind of support they provide. One of the things that I think is important to know, and some of you may have heard this lingo, is that we are doing really pushing for MTSS levels of service and PBIS, positive behavior intervention support. I think I got that right. And that's relevant to the roles of our professionals, because it really helps us kind of guide how we support students. Our social workers, as I note, tend to be more of our tier 2 and our tier 3. So that would be more of our small group situations or our individual situations. We like to utilize the tiered support specialists for a lot of the tier 1 sort of building wide, campus wide kind of interventions and support. And then they do some tier 2 supports as well. We have the counselors would also be primarily probably tier 1 or tier 2 and tier 3 with some tier 1 supports, depending on the level if they are elementary, middle, or high school. Our psychologists primarily are supporting our special ed populations and doing their primary focus is doing psychoeducational evaluations. So kids that have gone through our STAT process and are ultimately maybe ending up with referrals for evaluation. That's their population. Supporting our self-contained classrooms, our special ed self-contained classrooms that we have in many of our campuses, and our resource students and all of those kinds of families. They are a good resource for families that are wondering about learning challenges. In those situations, you would start with your teacher, but that ultimately you might end up having a conversation with the psychologist. And then of course our nurses, which frankly, I don't know how we would survive without our nurses. They are the backbone of some of our campus support, because they have the, maybe not luxury sometimes to them, but they have the luxury of being in one place all day. So they're in one room where the students can always come to them, which is kind of nice to know that person's always there. So they obviously provide a lot of medical and health services to our families. We are seeing them supporting a lot with some of our challenging behaviors in terms of like anxiety and depression, and kids that they sort of know that person is in their seats during the day and they can go to them. That's a good place for kids sometimes to start, because they are available. The rest of us might be running around campus and they can't find us right away. So they're good that way too. You can see the list of things. This is not a comprehensive list of what people can do, but this is a beginning list of what we do. One of the things that I think is important to note is that our tiered support specialists, are composed of 3 different types of professional. We have teachers, social workers, and counselors, and psychologists, actually, so 4, who are all tiered support specialists. So we try as a district, we kind of call ourselves the student support professionals, and within that group of student support professionals, we have mental health professionals, we call them. And if a tiered support specialist has a social worker counseling degree, we would consider them to also be a mental health professional. Only thing that changes is there might be a few things in their daily job that they can do that would be similar to what I as a social worker would do, more of the crisis intervention and kind of helping navigate maybe the mental health issues. I want to be very clear that we're not doing clinical services on any campus. We are not doing counseling. We're not clinically licensed necessarily. We're not providing therapy. None of that kind of thing is happening. When I say we're providing crisis services, think of, something tragic has happened and a child happens to be upset that day in school, and we might be trying to work through that so that they can be back in class. Our primary job as student support professionals is to support a student's ability to be in their classroom so that they can continue to learn. And so we do what is necessary to make that happen. I think that's pretty much the list in terms of the navigating concerns. So this was an interesting thing for me to think about. As the person on the other side, who might be the person that needs to come to or be part of like a meeting. This is an interesting question for me. So I tried to make it very simple. I just think that from what I see, I think it's always important for families to remember that we as schools really do want to partner with you. We really do want to do what is in the best interest of your child with your help, together with you. So always kind of come into a conversation with that in mind. These conversations, when you're concerned or you have something going on, can be really challenging. And I can recognize that, we can recognize that. So we don't want to set it up to be at odds from the beginning. So always remember, we really do want to partner with you. Make sure you're asking questions, clarifying questions, specific questions. Like, it's always good to get more information. So if you have questions, ask those questions and let people answer them for you. And then I think one of the most important things we have to remember to ask is, as a parent, how can you help? What could you be doing? And then, or also, how can we be working together? Ultimately, the goal is to support your student. That's always what we want, right? So we want to be figuring that out together. And I think one of the things that sometimes I notice is that families are hesitant to share with us information about their family, whether that be a circumstance that's happening currently, some changes that have occurred, some family history that might be relevant to what's going on. And I would like to encourage families to not be worried about that. We will take your information and we will use it. It will be private in the sense that we're not going to blast your family business out to everybody. But sometimes things that are happening in your family are very relevant to what's happening in your building and with your student. And so it's good to be able to work together with all of the information, if that makes sense. And really just remember that this is what we're here for, is to support your kids. And so we want to do that with you. We definitely don't want to do that against you. And if you have concerns, if you think your concerns fall into the sort of mental health, social skills, kind of daily living aspect, then any one of these professionals that you might have on your campus would be a good place for you to start. Good. We'll do questions after, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, you wanna hand it on to Dr. Lindsay, Dr. Courson?
Sure.
Good morning again, everybody. So my name again is Heidi Lindsay. I'm new to the district. I can still play the rookie card for the next 9 months or so, right? I started in July, so I'm still learning a lot about our district and all of our procedures and all of the great people that we have. So my role and Dr. Courson's role is that we support and supervise our school principals. So I have all the elementary schools and Dr. Courson has our middle and high school. So in this work, we directly collaborate with principals on a daily basis. We lead monthly administrator meetings. And then here at the district office, we're also doing a lot of site visits, spend a lot of time in schools doing walkthroughs with in classrooms, spending time with our principals, providing them support. You know, their jobs are extremely complex and they're really difficult, right? And they are very busy people. So we're helping just navigate day-to-day challenges, talking about that, also long-range planning, talking about academic programming, operational issues, you name it. So if there is a concern that happens at a site, you know, and all of these great services and people there are your first go-to people to, you know, get the needs met of your child. And if there are challenges with those conversations with any of those individuals, and of course, the classroom teacher, the next layer to go to is the school administrator, right? The principal or the assistant principal. In our elementary schools, we have teachers on assignment. They're always there as well to, you know, respond to any concerns that our families have with whatever's going on. If there is, and that's kind of what our governing board policy says too. We want if there's a conflict of any kind, we want those to be resolved with the people that are directly impacted. Sometimes that is not the case. You may just find that, you know, for whatever reason, you're not feeling supported or the issues are not being addressed. The district office is obviously here to help support that as well. Dan and I support two student services directors, Dr. Else, who is with the elementary, and Dr. Asmussen, who is with secondary, and he also oversees school safety, and he's got a bunch of different hats he wears, right? Same with Dr. Else. So if a call comes here to the district office, our receptionists, you know, listen to what the concern is, and then they may patch it through to our office, and likely it will be Becky Carlson, right? That's her last name, Carlson, one of those two. She's amazing. She takes a lot of calls, and she will determine if it's a secondary issue or an elementary issue, and then most of the time, Dr. Else or Dr. Asmussen would be the person that would call you back. Unless it's something real specific, like if it's a special education issue, then they may move that team in. It really depends on, you know, the concern. And then kind of our process is that we want to hear and just collect as much information as we can from our parents, you know, what's the concern. We take a lot of notes, try to learn, you know, exactly what's going on and what the concerns are. And then typically what happens is they'll ask for the opportunity to loop back with the school, then they'll get some more information, and then they'll connect back with you. But they're really trying to help mediate whatever concern there is and help find a common solution. And then Dr. Courson and I may get involved depending on the issue, but most of the time, I would say that's really, we're able to find a resolution at that point. Would you like to add anything?
Wow, I think you covered it, but I know that Dr. Lindsay and I meet with our directors frequently. And so we're oftentimes, if not directly involved with some situations that are happening at the school, we're certainly aware of that and aware of the conversations, so that as we're out in schools, working with the principals and assistant principals, we have some general understanding of maybe some recent issues that they've been dealing with as well. I would only add maybe at the secondary level, we have some of the luxury to have school counselors available too. And so those can be certainly resourced to parents at the middle school and high school, especially in helping your child navigate a particular situation with another student, or even navigate situations with a particular teacher that they might be having a conflict. A counselor can really be there to kind of support that conversation, to support giving that student some skills to help them advocate on behalf of themselves, because we are trying to develop our students' capacity to navigate these situations as well. So these counselors can be very useful in those situations. At the high school level too, though, when there is a concern, many times the principal will ask an assistant principal to get involved. As those of you who have secondary children at the middle school or high school, oftentimes an assistant principal is assigned a particular grade level. And so that grade level is the responsibility of that assistant principal. And so when there's an issue that arises with a particular student, oftentimes it's the assistant principal that is working with that particular student. That doesn't mean that the principal isn't involved. In fact, we would ask if the situation isn't resolved at that assistant principal, that you do involve that principal. The principal may or may not have some awareness of the situation and can certainly leverage some support to help come to a positive resolution, which is what we're all seeking in every case here, is that, ultimately we want a positive resolution so that this student or child can re-enter the situation in a safe environment, if that's the case, or certainly feeling good about their experience. So that's something that we're always striving to do, and to provide tools to that child and to the family to work successfully in that situation.
And we also, look for trends too. If we're seeing a specific challenge at one site with a particular issue, and that's being talked about, by families or staff members or whoever it is, then we're actively working with the principal to try to solve that challenge as well. And as you said, we're in constant communication with our two directors. With having 27 elementaries, I rely on Danielle a lot. We're talking all the time as we're supporting, different things that pop up in the school.
And the four of us meet with the team quite regularly as well as an entire team, just to kind of process more system-wide things that we're seeing across K-12. That oftentimes things that are happening at the elementary levels do cross over into secondary. And we just want to make sure that we're addressing those things as a system, as opposed to isolated incidents. So it does help when we come together and really look at things like suspension data, or things that social media concerns that we see crossing over from school to school or from grade levels to grade levels. Those are things that we can have a more district level approach to those things, as opposed to depending on the school to handle those autonomously.
All right, and anyone else at the district level? When I come up, that's usually what happens. What about like on the superintendent directly? Is that a thing?
It can be a thing for sure. I mean, sometimes
It has been.
Yeah, sometimes, families don't know where to go first, and they may think like superintendent, and then typically if that's the case, then he will be in touch with us, and then we will kind of take it from there, and then we'll keep him updated.
And one place when we have a critical issue going on with a particular student situation or at a school, we do inform the superintendent of those things as well. We don't want him to be blindsided as he's visiting schools or talking to the second grade parent yesterday that something happened in the second grade class. We do try to keep our superintendent informed around those issues that may eventually at some point rise to the level of his awareness. So we don't want to blindside him.
Great, okay, and now, Julie, you can tell us a little bit more about what the governing board does and when parents might want to reach out to the governing board.
And I'm gonna ask you if you will distribute those. I forgot to do that before I sat down, so sorry about that. Hi, everybody. My name is Julie Bacon, and I am a former governing board member in the Courson Unified School District. And I served for 3 terms, and it was, except the last few years were during COVID, so that was like serving, 7 years. So, I don't know, I think I served like 30 years. But I now work for the Arizona School Boards Association, and I'm the Director of Leadership Development, and I have the opportunity and privilege of working with school boards across Arizona. So I have worked with hundreds of different school boards on a variety of different issues, and I love the work. It is a great thing to do. So I created just a little bit of a handout here, and I'll go through these 10 things you should know about school boards. But on the other side, you can kind of see a graphic that we use a lot at ASBA to delineate the responsibilities of the board and the superintendent. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So the first thing to know about governing boards is that student success is the #1 responsibility of school boards. So school boards should be paying attention to how students are doing, the things that they are accomplishing, the areas in which they need support. And of course, you can't look at every single student, certainly in a district of this size, but you should be, school boards should be paying attention to how are we doing, how are students doing academically, and where can we help as a board to allocate resources, time, energy to improve things for students. The second one is being a board member may look easy, but it's not. It is a whole lot of responsibility. And I'm also a former UPC president. So I have had lots of leadership roles in the district. I was a PTO president, UPC president. But once you sit in that seat on the governing board, you are kind of like, oh boy, like this is the big time. So it is very difficult. And one of the things that was really difficult for me is I am a social worker, and I am a helper, and I am a problem solver. And when people come to me with problems, I want to solve them. But guess what? As a board member, you can't do that. You need to let other people solve the problems. So that was something that was really hard for me to manage when I first became a board member. Boards are created because Arizona state statute allows for it. So the duties and responsibilities of governing boards are in Arizona Revised Statutes 15-341 and 342. And that is noted there. If you have trouble sleeping one night, you could pull that up. So that tells us what boards have to do, and it tells us what boards may do. And there's a list of about 70 on each of those lists. So most of that is delegated to the superintendent. The board isn't involved in the day-to-day operations of the district, but hires a superintendent to carry out those duties. Another thing that's a little challenging about being a governing board member is Arizona's open meeting law applies to governing board members, which means that a quorum of board members cannot talk about anything that might come before the board if they are not in a meeting. So as a UPC president, as a PTO president, as a mom, I was always like, oh, what do you think of that? And what do you think of that? What do you think of that? Well, once I became a board member, I couldn't talk to all the board members about what they thought about that because we were going to be voting on it. And the point of a governing board is to have discussion, debate in the open for the public to see. And so you need to be really careful about who you talk to about things and making sure that you are not violating open meeting law. I would say to people, when I was on the board, we looked like we didn't even like each other because we'd be in something like this and one of us would be over there and one would be over there. But it was just about the perception that we didn't want anyone to think we were doing board business in a non-public meeting. So that's the other thing. I already said the board's job is oversight and not the day-to-day operations of the school district. Very difficult, but I'm going to give you kind of an example of how the board can impact the day-to-day operations of the district, but from their level. So thinking about, the concern and complaint and concern policy and the forms that you have to fill out for that. So let's just say I'm a governing board member and I'm getting a lot of parents coming to me saying, I have a concern, how do I take care of it? Well, here's the policy, here are the things that you do, and here's the form that you need to fill out. Well, I get a lot of people talking about this form and how it is, they don't understand. What am I supposed to put on here? It's not clear. So the board, from their perspective, not solving the person's problem, but solving maybe a problem that a lot of parents are seeing. I don't understand how to fill this form out and get my concern addressed. So those are the kinds of ways that boards can impact. So they can't impact the actual thing, but they can impact maybe process of how things are happening. Number 6, very important, board members are the last stop in a concern or complaint process. You get a lot of people when you're a board member calling you and saying, I want this fixed right now. And I often would think, if you had a problem with your phone, would you call the board of directors of Apple? No, right? But your phone is not as precious as your child. And so when it's your child, I need to get this fixed now. And so dealing with that emotion and that, I did it, probably all of you did it, the mama bear, the papa bear, the balls come out because someone was wrong to my child. And maybe they have, maybe they haven't, who knows? Depends on your child, right? I mean, one of mine I would have believed, the other one, I don't know. So it is hard. It's equally frustrating for board members to hear concerns from parents and not be able to do anything about it. But that's why you have the people that we have here. I mean, this is why we rely on the people that work in the district who have expertise around these issues. So the call to the public, I'm sure, are you all familiar with call to the public at board meetings where people come and complain mostly about things? Sometimes, every once in a while, they're like, you guys are great. And you're like, oh my gosh. People will call me, I'm coming to the meeting, I'm calling the public, I'm gonna get this resolved. And I would always say to them, that is going to be the most unsatisfying thing you ever do. And they're like, why? Well, because we can't talk to you about it, right? That is in open meeting law. We have to abide by open meeting law. If something is not on the agenda, the board cannot respond to it. So there are lots of ways that you can get things resolved. And I think almost always they can be resolved at the lowest level possible. And so that's what I would encourage you to do. And board members are the last stop because they, in fact, may have to vote on something related to an issue. They cannot have prior knowledge of it. So that is something to think about. There are 3 duties that boards cannot delegate, and that is approving policy, adopting a budget, and the supervision and evaluation of the superintendent. So those are 3 things that no one else can do, only the board can do. Board positions are nonpartisan. Have you noticed that? But they're inherently political. They just are. And it's, I think, become more so over the past decade or so. And what we believe at ASBA is that local control is the best way for schools to be governed. So you're electing the people who are going to represent you, and those are the people who are going to make the decisions. Some of them may come from a partisan place, others may not, but the ultimate goal should always be student success. What can we do to make students successful? Have you ever heard someone say, I'm going to run for the school board and I'm going to change this? Well, it's super hard to do that. If you come with one thing that you want to change, that's going to be hard because a board is a team and you must have a quorum of people representing what you want to happen. So it is incumbent upon your boards, our boards across the nation to work together as a team and make sure that you are focused on the same thing. I've gone in and facilitated very difficult conversations It's with boards across Arizona. And when you start with, why are you here? Everyone's there for the same reason. They just have different ways of getting to the end and getting to a decision. So finding those common places are, that's important. And when I was on the board, didn't always agree with all the rest of my board members. Imagine that. I didn't always agree, but you had to talk it through. You had to come to some sort of resolution, consensus, thought process. And sometimes you're in the minority and you just are. And you got to move on and keep working together. And I think during my time on the board, and certainly Susan's time when she was a board member, we did that very well. We didn't always agree. Sometimes we had opposing votes, but we still said goodbye to each other when we left the meeting. Have a great vacation, you know, whatever it was. And so that's important as well. And then school boards impact every aspect of the school district. And I like to tell board members that your board culture will eventually become the culture of the school district. So if you are a working team that is always focused on what is best for students, that's what's going to happen in your school district as well. So those are just 10 things. There's probably 10,000 more things I could say, but I'm going to.
So, yeah, we ask questions now or
Shut this off. We keep saying this.
while we're on the governing board part?
Yes.
So, few questions.
Okay.
First. So, if the board cannot do anything to solve issues, why is there the call to the public for them? They're just wanting to hear themselves speak.
Well, I mean, sometimes call to the public can be relevant. In Paradise Valley, we allow for call to the public on agenda items. So that's helpful, right?
Right.
The thing about call to the public is it's not required. It's not required to be done by law in Arizona. No school district has to allow for that. We can say we're not doing that. But I think it's more about wanting people to know that they can talk to us. But what a board can do during call to the public, if something comes up, they could say, you know, Superintendent Smith, please work with this family or give some resources to this family. Or a board member can say, you know, this is interesting. I'd like to talk about this on a future agenda. So it's not totally useless because you do find things out sometimes that you want to address and you can address. You just maybe can't do it right then.
And then the full open meeting law. The governing board obviously can't talk about an issue. Are the cabinets part of the open meeting law? So like if somebody comes up and talks about something that is completely unfactual, like we don't have a bus at all in our school district. Well, we know we have buses. Can somebody who's on the cabinet say, actually, that's like, kind of like fact check, like people come up there and maybe will scare the entire.
You mean during a board
During
meeting?
a board meeting and say something that is completely not true. But people are gonna believe it because that's what they hear.
It's kind of happened.
Well, it happens.
On agenda items when they're speaking.
Well, if
on
it's not on an
specific-
agenda item, but something completely random. That's gonna freak the whole population, whoever's listening.
A superintendent could make a very brief statement around, you know, we certainly have a bus schedule. I'll follow up with you, you know, later this evening, or if you wait till after the meeting, I'll show you everything you need to see about the bus schedule or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, cabinet members and superintendents can violate open meeting law if they are I think the word that the law uses is the instrument that violates law. So if I meet with the superintendent and I say, I'm gonna vote like this at the upcoming meeting. And then he meets with somebody else and says, Julie's voting like this, and meets with somebody else that says Julie's voting like this. Then the superintendent in fact has violated it. The board members haven't,
Right.
because they didn't talk to each other. So it's a tricky situation to be in. Sometimes as superintendent or assistant superintendents, when you may be talking to numerous board members and you know things that they're saying, but you can't really share what they're saying with another board.
I feel like there's been some times where people would come up and speak to you guys and say something that is so out there. And whether it's about money, where it goes, where, you know, they're spending money on sending kids, they're sending the teachers somewhere. Can't the person who's in charge, like the, you know, elementary person, say, we actually are not sending 6 teachers, we're only sending 1 teacher, or there are some people like, wow, they really do that, you know, and
Yeah.
like, that's where I'm like, I get so
There's-
frustrated watching these meetings and be like, come on, like, really, like, now whoever's gonna be like, oh, that's what our district does, because that's what someone spoke about, and that their kid had this happen.
Well, here's the good news.
Yeah,
The good news is people like you guys who are watching,
yeah,
who know better most of the time, right? You know, it's not like you have 3,000 people watching the board meetings and hearing what they're saying. It's a very small audience now. It was way bigger during COVID.
yeah, yes.
But, so there's that, and I think there's the opportunity for, the district could respond to those things. In like a future newsletter, or they could send out an email to parents. So there's ways that they could respond if something's particularly egregious. But in general, I always say it to board members, it's probably not worth it to keep that conversation going. It just highlights the inaccurate information as opposed to just allowing you to do the work that you're there to do. So.
And then like, so going back to like the topic of, where to start, so, but this has not happened to me, I'm just using it as an example, okay, so my son feels like he's being bullied by his 3rd grade teacher. Well, as a parent, I'm not gonna wanna email the teacher about that. Or do I email the teacher, CC the principal, do I CC principal, superintendent, like, where would a parent contact if they felt like their kid wasn't getting the support they needed? I'm thinking, you know, they have the blind CCs, like, you wanna send an email, do we send it to just principal, do you send it to principal or school psychologist, like, where would a parent go?
I'll start that answer. So I think this kind of goes back to my suggestion that we ask a lot of questions. I think you have to be very careful in that situation of immediately sending an email to supervisory staff with the assumption that everything you know is true. I think that it is very important to have a meeting in those situations with the teacher and to present the meeting as clearly something is not working because my son feels like he's being picked on and I want to know all of the facts. And just start gathering your information. Let the teacher talk about what their processes are in class, whatever the case may be, right? And then take your information that you get from having that meeting with the teacher and sort of evaluate what your next step might need to be on that. Is it more of a conversation that then you can have with both the teacher and your student? Or is it that you go home and talk to your students some more about some of the things the teacher has now shared with you? You might get to the point where you feel like you need to pull in a principal just for more bodies at the table, for more kind of mediation conversation. But I think that's one of the hardest places to be on both sides, because as the parent, you definitely want to support and protect your child. You know that. As the teacher, they may or may not be doing anything wrong. And when you walk into a situation, assuming they have, everybody's now on the defense. And that's not going to be what's best for your kid. So that would be my suggestion is if you feel like you can have that sort of information gathering conversation with the teacher, I would definitely start there.
What if the parent, and let's say a 6th grader, and a parent thinks, they think the teacher's bullying the child might not feel that way. Then should the parent talk to the teacher at that point too?
If the parent feels like they could have that conversation in a very calm fashion, then I would say yes, but if not, then that could be a principal conversation to start with, or a principal and teacher conversation.
I agree with what she said.
Yeah.
I just think that, you know, it's hard to have those conversations, right?
Yeah.
You know, difficult conversations between adults and navigating conflict is not fun for anybody, right? And so it makes us feel uncomfortable, but, you know, if we're thinking about always putting the child, the student at the center of it, and we have to validate the feelings of the child. The child is not feeling comfortable in that particular situation, and so let's talk about why they're feeling this way. And it could be a communication thing that teacher and parent are able to solve and or put in some strategies and just open up the lines of communication. And many of the times it's easy, it's not easy, but it can be solved through that way. And if it's not, that's when the opportunity to engage an administrator can be really helpful. But I agree, like jumping the teacher and going right to the principal, it can always be done, you know, the principal is the leader of the school, but it doesn't help the relationship between the parent and the teacher, because they're the ones that are, you know, closest to the student and are really, we want to partner with, so they can work together to support the academic development of the child.
I mean, I'm gonna comment on this just because as a parent. I just think sometimes you have, as a parent, you need to think about, what's the best way for me to do this? I know I need to talk to the teacher. And in my house, the best way to do that was to send my husband. Because I was not always home about things. So I think your family can figure out a way to address things that maybe aren't, you're sending in the least hot person into the conversation. Because sometimes it's hard. Now, there would be things I think that I would be better at talking to teachers about than my husband would. So I think that's just something you can have at your level as well as at the family level. What's the best way for us to address this? When my daughter was in kindergarten, I really didn't like her teacher, and it wasn't here. I really didn't like her, and I kept calling my friend and talking to her and blah. And finally, she said to me, "Oh, what does your daughter think of the teacher?" And I was like, "She loves her." And she's like, "Isn't that the answer?" Yes. So we never did anything about it. I had problems with the teacher, but my daughter just happily went to kindergarten every single day and learned to read, and she was fine.
So I think everyone should follow the sports rule. Like if your kids play sports, there's a 24-hour rule. Like you cannot talk to the coach after a game for 24 hours. And it's to let you cool down. And I have used it, not even for sports, but like something really bugged me about my daughter. I might call and complain, but then I'll write a letter to myself, write it, don't send it. And the next day I'll look at it, like fully calm, my emotions high. And then you could really get more productive when you send an email to a teacher or principal. That 24-hour thing is true.
That's really good advice.
Really good
There are a
advice.
lot of hot emails at 3:30.
Yeah.
They're not helping anybody.
No.
Everybody's probably still hot. We're about whatever happened.
Yeah.
So no, you're absolutely right.
That 24-hour rule it's huge.
Yeah.
And now I get it. I'm like, write that email, but just don't send it.
Yeah.
What else? Are any questions or advice or something you wanna find out of what to do for situations? No?
I have like a random question, because we were new to the district last year. And I guess talked about some of these amazing support staff. This is probably like a too big question, but is there a way that parents can help support having more support staff full-time in schools? I know the money, she's made the money.
It's a great question.
But I don't know.
It's about advocacy. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
The funding is the issue with almost all of that.
Yeah.
And the funding isn't something you talk to a board about. Governing boards have almost no control over revenue. The only control they have over revenue are the local elections, bonds and overrides. But it really is, the legislature tells you, I mean, imagine having to run a business with somebody telling you, you only get this much every single time. And every year it's different, and things are given to you and then taken away from you the next year. And then, so, I think the advocacy piece is really important, the legislative advocacy, and also federal advocacy, because, we have really unfunded special ed education the entire time the federal government has been providing funds for special education. So it's really about, you know, and it is about them understanding that parents have priorities. And they're not necessarily the priorities of the small group of constituents that they talk to.
It's fine. I don't want anyone to be confused, like, as you said, that the federal government was providing money, but we didn't have the money.
So when the federal government came, and you guys probably know way more about this than I do, when they did IDEA, the idea was that they were gonna fund, I think, 75% of the education for special needs students. And I don't think that's ever gone above 22% or something like that. They've never given the full funding that they have promised. And that's because, you know, they pay taxes, so. There's just-
IDEA is special education law, and it was came from the federal government, and so there's an element of federal funding we get for special education, but to your point, that's not nearly enough based on what the costs and the needs are to appropriately service kids. And then Arizona, as you know, is one of the lowest funding public education states in our country, and so it just compounds the problem. We did have some additional assistance from the federal government over the last few years with COVID relief funds with ESSER. But districts all over the country, Arizona, we're faced with that, those cuts now, that funding is gone. And so it's impacted schools everywhere because they used some of that money to help support some of these extra positions to support kids through the whole pandemic. And then unfortunately, it wasn't sustainable. And so we find ourselves in a difficult position in our industry for sure.
Okay, well, we got a late start, but this really was about our cutoff time. So we covered a lot, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar because of everything we went through in the meeting as well. So there's a lot to process. If you have questions in the future, about this, and you can always contact me or go to the schools directly. Do you have any other contact information you want to share, direct them on where to go if they have random questions or specific questions?
I have some cards that back there. A card. Touch with me.
No,
you don't get cards.
I'll just add that the district has a family, a parent student handbook that's on our website, and it talks about the range of topics and procedures. So, you know, in terms of complaints or concerns, our discipline, code of conduct is in there. There's just a ton of information. So that could be a great resource for our families as well.
I would imagine everybody knows how to contact you. So if they needed a specific contact, that would be the easiest way to get hold of them.
info@pvupc.org, president@pvupc.org, or our website. I want to thank all of you. You definitely had such a very all of you together have approached this in such a nice, such calmness and welcoming way that I know as a parent, seriously though, this could have been, more defensive or something else. And hopefully this is reflective of what will happen if any of us should happen to have an issue or a concern that we want to deal with, and maybe can keep in mind that, hopefully we're all have the same shared goal of doing what's in the best interest and student success and trying to take care of our kids. So thank you for giving us the time today and sharing this information and making yourselves available for these questions, and definitely appreciate how you presented the information today. I think it's been very positive, and I think that's all I have. So thank you.